So let's dig in and actually write some code now. So in my Chapter 9 folder, I would like you to open writing HTML.html and writing HTML end. So in the end, if I take a look at my design, what I have here is I have a header, a subhead 3, subhead 4, paragraph, some list items, bold and italic list items, a link, and a footer for what we're going to do with this file next. So if I go over to my writing HTML, then I see where all of those things are, but nothing's been done with them. And if I look at these in my design view, whoa, wait a minute, that doesn't look anything like you'd actually like it, right? So we go back over to our code view, and let's go ahead and write some of that code. So if I have a header here, I can really let Dreamweaver help me out by using my code hints. So if I start typing an H then, now I see that I have this pop up as an H1. So I hit my return key, and now I need to finish the end of that open tag. I go to the close of it, and because of how I have my preferences, if I start to end that and do a /, then it's going to go ahead and end that for me. And again, that was in my preferences, and let me bring that up for you. So I'm in my code hints, and this is how I close my tags. So after I type the /, it's going to go ahead and change it for me, or after I type the end of the opening tag, it could just go ahead and put that closing tag in for me, or I would want to do it myself. And if Dreamweaver is going to do it for me, why in the world would I want to do it myself? So my subhead 2, if I at least get exactly where I think that I'm in the same grouping, then I can just use my down arrow to go to that particular one. And I can close that off. And I'll let you guys go ahead and do the other two. My paragraph is just a P, and I can close that off as well. Now I've got several list items here, and I'd like to make two separate lists, so I'm going to make myself a little bit of room above and below each of my items here. So on this one, I'd like this to be a bulleted list. This is an unordered list, so it doesn't have an order to it. It doesn't have a 1, 2, 3 to it. So it's going to be, if I start typing UL, and then I immediately want to close that so I don't forget it. Now I've got these list items. Now a list item is just that, an LI, and I can type that in there and close that off. So I'll do these and have that be closed. Oh, I didn't add my close, so it didn't understand what I'm looking for it to do. Great example of why we want to make sure and let the code hint help us out. And then I know that I've got the right thing. So if I take a look at that portion now, and while I'm waiting for you to do the other two, let me just fix this so I don't see that in my code. So H3, and then I'll do an H4, just so I don't have a problem there. Okay, so if I take a look now, I see that I've got all of my headers, I have my paragraph, and I have my bulleted list. Now all the rest of it still looks kind of messy, but we'll fix that in just a minute. Now let's say that I would like this top item to be bold and this next item to be italic. So I'm going to go back to my code. So I'm going to start typing strong. We don't use really B anymore at all to specify bold. And I will close that out. Don't need that extra space in there. So whenever I add items like this, I need to make sure that my structure is correct. So for instance, my list item really comes first. So I need to kind of open and close that particular item first. And then my strong is on the inside of that. I wouldn't want my closed strong tag to be on the other side of my LI. I want to keep it on the inside. So if I do this one, and then we'll take a look at both, and this is just going to be an EM, and because we're writing it in the HTML, it means something totally different. We've been talking about M's this, M measurement for that, but it's mostly for fonts, so don't get that confused. This is an M, meaning that it's going to be italic. So when I'm writing it in the HTML, that means something totally different than what I'm writing it inside of my CSS. And I'll close that off and take a look at my design view, and now I've got a bold item and an italic item. And now let's write an ordered list. So my ordered list is just that. So it's OL. And it has the same list items. So for time's sake, I'm just going to copy that, and I'm going to paste those same list items in, but I need to remember to finish off that particular portion of my tag. Now if I go to my design view, I see that I now have that list item. Now remember before, when I clicked on either the beginning part or the end part of that tag, then I'm also able to change that list item. So if I click on that button inside of my property inspector, and I see that I have a numbered list and I have a style. So do I want that to be an alphabet or a Roman numeral or a number? And do I want it to start on maybe a different number? And if I click OK, then I see that it now starts at 4 instead of 1. So now we have a link. So I'm going to go back over here to my code. So for my link, let's say that we're going to link this to another page in our site. So I need to put my very first tag in here, and what tag specifies a link is my A tag. So I also now need a space, because just the tag itself isn't going to really do me much any good. I need to say where that's going to be. I need to give an href. And now I can browse for that particular link. So if I browse, then maybe I will just go to my index page. So again, it just leaves that open, and now I need to close that. And I close that with a / in front of it. So to keep my footer looking a little bit better, we'll just make that into a paragraph. And now we have a nice structured page. So it really turns out the HTML part really wasn't all that bad, right? So now we can actually write some CSS. So if you look at your files panel, you'll see a file called ratingcss.html. Let's go ahead and open that. Now our page is just a little bit more structured than it was. It should look very similar, not exactly the same as our rating HTML, but very similar to it. So we've got a little bit of content here. We've got a header area, we have some content, and a sidebar and a footer. If I take a look at my code, you'll see that I have a class style called container that is wrapped around the entire page. So if I come back over here to my design view, I put my cursor in here anywhere, notice that my tag inspector really allows me to select exactly what I want. So I'll select that, and I see that it is indeed wrapped around all of my content. So if I go back over to my code view, I see then I've got a div called content. Now this is very important to notice kind of where these are at inside of our structure. So because my content is above my sidebar, it's going to need to have a float to it, because anything that is floated needs to be above anything that is not. And then we have our footer. So both of our sidebar and our content are both going to have a float to it. And then we need to be able to clear that float at the end to make sure that our footer doesn't move along to the side of everything else. Let me just write this over again here. let's say we don't have a div there at all for around my footer. So here I would start typing DI, and then it should already take me to div. And as soon as I type in my spacebar, then it gives me my code hints as to what I can do with that particular tag. So this is going to be a class style, and as soon as I start typing C, it takes me over to class style. And I don't have a style sheet attached to this, so nothing looks right at the moment. So now I'm going to just type footer. Now, one big distinction here as I just typed that. So you'll notice that we have class styles so far, but nothing has a dot in front of it. So when we were writing our CSS before using our CSS panels and our properties inspector, then we were putting a dot in front of it. The only other time that we didn't do that was when we used our insert menu and chose to wrap our items around a div tag in that fashion. And it knows that it's a class style, it knows that it needs that dot in front of it to actually be a class style, so I don't have to put one in here inside of my code. And then all I have to do is close that off. So you'll see a pattern here so far that most things that I open, I then have to close. So let's go back over to our design view, and we'll go ahead and attach a style sheet that we can then work with. So I'm going to click on the Attach Style Sheet button over in my CSS panels. I'm going to browse, and I'm going to choose writing.css, which is located in the CSS folder, which is in the Assets folder inside your Chapter 9 project folder. Again, even though we are adding this to just a page that we're just working with, it's not going to be live, keep in mind you want to choose your media type in the end. So what is this particular style sheet going to be for? Is it going to be just what it shows like it looks like on the screen? Or is it going to be for print or projection, etc.? So I'm just going to choose screen, so that way if I finally end up with a page that I want to actually use, then I already have the correct media type for it. So I'm going to click OK. And I see a little bit of change, but let's take a look at the code itself. Either I can go into split view and see the CSS and the design view at the same time, or I can right click on this and choose to open this in its own separate file. So let's see this in split view, and then I will click on just the writing CSS. And this is really so incredibly handy to be able to go back and forth from my related files view to the content of my page itself and see in design view and how this changes immediately. Now we don't have anything all that exciting going on in our CSS other than that we have our body written. So that I have a margin of 0, a padding of 0, and I've got my font size and my font family already decided, and the color in my page. I've just got a dark gray. So now we need to define for the container. So for instance, if you want to make sure and know how to write that, I'm just going to get rid of that container one and we'll just write that ourselves. So I just put a dot so that I know that it's going to be a class style. So it is going to be container, and now I need an open brace and a close brace. And now I can put my information inside of here. So if I hit my return key, once I am inside of that top left curly brace, then I immediately get my code hints for my CSS. So what might I want that to look like? So we're going to make this into a fairly simple math-wise container. So I need to define a width for it. This is my outside container. Once I type width, I see my code hints pop up, I find that, and I just hit my enter or return to apply that. So this isn't going to be auto itself. My width is going to be an actual value. And if I'm going to use ems, remember ems and percentages are the only really true relative measure. So if my end user did a control plus or a command plus, then they would be able to increase both the font size and the container size at the same time. So everything scales accordingly, which is really what I want in the end. So since I chose my font size to be 62.5, that's basically the same as 10 pixels. So it makes it a whole lot easier to make those M measurements. So I'm going to choose 80 M, and how I end my sentence. So I have my property and then its value. Container is the rule. So since I chose 80, now that's basically going to be the same size as about 800 pixels wide. So now I can hit my enter or return, and I can decide what I want that to then look like. So let's make it centered. So to center that container, I need to give it a margin, and I can give it either a margin left or just a margin right, but let's see how we can write this shorthand wise. So I see that I've got margin in there, and the way when I write shorthand works with anything that has a top, left, right, and bottom is that it goes in a clockwise fashion. So if I'm going to write this, I don't want any margin at the top, then I write 0, and then my left and my right is going to be auto so that it is centered in the page. If I really wanted to do some shorthand, that's really all I basically need, because then both of those repeat. I want 0 at the very top, and I want 0 at the very bottom of my page. I don't want that container to have any margin on it, and I want it to be centered in my page, so I need just an auto, and that's actually going to work perfectly. Now let's make sure we can actually see that, so I'm going to give that a little bit of a border, and I'm going to give it solid, and that is going to be a 1 pixel, and it's then going to have a color to it, because we need all three of those things. Well, let's just give it something simple so we can actually see it. And then I close that off. Now the header, go ahead and put your cursor inside of there, and we'll go ahead and style that. Actually, let's go back and hit your return key. It's a whole lot easier just having that code hints just pop right up for you. So we're just going to give it a height so we can see it. And let's say 10M for my height. And let's just give it a color. And I'm going to make this as ugly as I can just to show where all the sections are. So now if I refresh and actually apply this, you see that I've given that a color. Now if I want to make sure and give that a background color, and now if I refresh that, I have that as a background color instead of just the text being that color. So it's pretty easy once you decide that you're writing some CSS that you can make that look really however you want. It's pretty simple. Now as I go along here, I'm going to make just some really simple choices here. I'm just going to hit my tab there, and this is going to be a float, but we're going to go ahead and give it a width first. If my container is 80M, then we'll give this a width of 50M. And this is going to float, and my float is going to be left. Now if I click on my refresh, you'll see that everything at the moment is trying to go to the side of that because we don't have anything cleared at the moment. So everything is going to try and push itself to the side. Not exactly attractive. So let's give this a really quick color here. So I want a background color, and we'll make it just as attractive as the other one. And I can refresh, and there's my content. So now for our sidebar, and we're going to float that right. So that has to have a width on it as well. So anything that has a float has to have a width. So we have the other one at 50. Let's give this a little bit of room here. So I'm going to have my width be 25M. And I want a margin right I don't want it to be all the way over to the very edge. And that is going to be, let's say, 1M. So 10 pixels basically. And we'll give it a background color as well. Again, I'm making with my incredibly attractive containers here. Now, that has a color to it, but we haven't actually given it a float, so it is automatically down underneath because we don't have room for it now. So here, let's make that have a float of right. Now we're going to see our footer try and make its way to the side of the other containers just because we haven't cleared that float yet. So anything that floats, notice that the container itself is above, so our items are overlapping. Let's go to our design view so you can actually see that. So our item is overlapping everything else. It's really not attractive at all. So I go to my code view, and right after footer, we'll give that a color in a minute, but really the most important thing here is to add a class style to clear our float. And I'm going to do a left brace, hit my enter key, and this is going to be clear of both, since I have both a left and a right. And I'm going to make this a size because we're going to put this on a BR tag. So I'm going to give it a font size of 1 pixel. And then I'm going to choose my right curly brace. We'll refresh that. Go to my source code. We need to go ahead and put that in there after that particular last div. So right before my footer, I'm going to put a BR. Then I'm going to put a space, and it's going to be a class style, and that is going to be clear float. And when I close that, it goes ahead and puts that slash in there for me, so I don't have to. I'm going to click refresh and take a look at my design view, and things are starting to look a little bit better. Now I need to style my footer, but everything else is really starting to fall into place. Now I could change the size of my sidebar, etc. Now there's one last thing that we could do, and that's actually make our headers. So I could do H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, H6, and my P tag, and give it a padding so that I didn't have to put padding on the containers themselves and then mess with my box model. So as long as I put my padding on the items inside of my containers, then I don't have to worry about my box model being messed up. Now there's some other views in being able to see CSS and work with CSS. So for instance, I've got some visual aids up here. Now we took a look at that with our table widths, but we also have a CSS layout background. And if we wouldn't have color-coded our containers, our boxes anyway, this allows us to see each item as a different color. So even my footer now has a color to it. Then I have my CSS layout box model. So what that does for me when I have that turned on, let me make sure that's turned back on again. When I click this box, for instance, I actually see the box model a part of it. So I see where I have a margin, etc. My next one is my CSS layout outlines. So I happen to like seeing the outlines, but in this view, at least when I put my cursor over something is when I actually see the outline of the item. And maybe you don't like to see the outlines otherwise. So if you find that troublesome, you can do that. Now remember, we also have our live view. So this is what it's going to look like in a browser approximately. This is using WebKit to preview our page. And if I want to see where I've got some problems at, then I would go to my inspect view. And when I roll my cursor, yes, it likes to see, let's go ahead and switch it. It wants to see both the code and the page at the same time. And it takes my CSS panel and puts it over and lets me see the cascade so that I can much more easily troubleshoot that particular section. So I see my header and some of my other contents. So when I put my cursor over that, my H2, I see that I've got a margin top and a margin bottom. So that is part of the problem in my page. So the same thing with my header and my footer here as well. I've got some of that as an issue. So let's go back over and uncheck Live View and see our code again here. So we'll quickly add our footer information in here. So I'm just going to tab that over and we'll add some padding. And let's just add 5 pixels of padding all the way around. And let's just give that a color as well. And again, we'll make that anything that you would like. And let's get rid of that problem that we have in our headers, etc. So I'm going to find that up here. And I'm going to make a spot here for this. So I'm going to say H1, comma, H2, comma, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and a comma for my P. And I'm going to add my left curly brace. I'm going to hit my return key. Now what we want initially, we want a margin top of 0. And then I want a padding left, let's say a 15, and a padding right of 15, just so we don't want it all the way over on the right hand side of a container. And now I will close that back off and let's refresh. And now when I go to my design and live view, my page looks much, much better. And then I can continue to style that page. So I hope that you found writing CSS really not all that hard. This chapter looks at HTML and CSS from the code point of view. We'll write our own CSS and HTML and do a little testing and debugging along the way. This is another drastically improved area of Dreamweaver CS5. If you've never written either before, don't worry, we'll look at the code together. So we've taken a look at CSS and HTML so far in our design view, but we really haven't done anything with the code view. So we're going to go ahead and do that now. So we're going to start by redefining our chapter. So I'll go to my Files panel, and I will click my Edit, and this is Chapter 9. And I'm going to go browse for that particular chapter now. And I'll say Save. And it's going to recreate that cache for me. Now I can say Done. So I have an About page right here, so let's go ahead and take a look at that. And if it's not already in your code view, if it's in Split or Design, go ahead and just go over to the code now. So we'll first take a look at the structure of our page. Now when we're looking at the HTML, we need to make sure that we have a doc type to start with. And then we've got an HTML and head and then a body. But we also need a link as well. So there must be a doc type, your root is your HTML, and the structure must include your head, title, and a body. Now all the elements in my body must also nest properly and be lowercase. So my body tag, and then everything is then nested properly inside of my page. I don't have my body on the outside of my HTML, for instance, so everything is nested properly. So before we can actually start writing some code, let's go ahead and take a look at our code view over on the left-hand side. So for instance, I've got a place to see any open documents, and I only have one open right now, so I don't have more than one to be able to select. I'm able to show my code navigator wherever I happen to be selected in here. If I show my code navigator, then I see the CSS that goes along with my cascade, so whatever is above that in my page. So I see that my container is 1,000 pixels, and my body tag has my font size, margin 0, padding 0, etc. Notice that you can also disable this feature so that it isn't popping up all the time, and then you would have to use your keyboard shortcut to be able to see that. So then we have a few buttons that allow us to collapse our tags. Move down just a little bit here. My very first button over here on the side allows me to collapse a full tag. So I have to be in either the beginning or the end of that tag for it to collapse that tag. So you might be asking yourself, well, why would I need to collapse a tag? Well, honestly, if I've got a table or if I've got some JavaScript or something in my code where I don't necessarily need to see it, I'm not going to change it, everything's fine with it, and I need to be able to see more of my page at a time, then it is very helpful to collapse your code so you just aren't seeing it. And on my Mac, I'm going to see a little bit of a different arrow here than I would have on the PC, but I can quickly and easily just kind of go back and forth and collapse and uncollapse that. I also have the ability to expand all from here, so maybe I've got several and I can just expand all at the same time. Now if I just grab some code, some random code here, and my next button down is my collapse selection. So it doesn't matter what I have selected, it will just go ahead and collapse that whole thing. Now the next one is really my favorite over on the side. I use this constantly because we are rating in divs. Then when I go down to the bottom of my page, I notice that I've got close div, close div, close div, and what the heck am I going to do with that, right? So if I put my cursor at the very end and then I click my select parent tag, then I'm going to be able to select the parent, and I can then see my structure a whole lot easier. Do I have enough closing divs? Do I have too many? And that is going to be able to help you figure that out very, very easily. Now my next one down is my balance braces. Now what it does, it selects the content and surrounding parentheses, braces, or square brackets of the line in which you place the insertion point. If you repeatedly click the button, then your surrounding symbols are balanced, and Dreamweaver actually selects the outermost braces inside of the document. So to be able to see that, I need some parentheses or some brackets, which I don't seem to have on this page. But strangely enough, my CSS does have braces. So I'm going to open styles.css, and if I put my cursor in anything that has a brace to it, I need to be inside, not on a comment, and I balance braces, then it will go ahead and select the content that's inside of that braces. So let's go back over to the about.html tab. Now the next several down are ones that I couldn't live without. So first off, we've got our line numbers. So I want to be able to see my line numbers in case somebody says, hey, there's a problem with line 120, and then I'll need to be able to see what that is. I can highlight invalid code. So if there is something missing in a part of my code, then it will highlight it in yellow so that I know that I have some invalid code. I have a word wrap. And my word wrap, I couldn't really live without it either. That way I don't have to scroll back and forth to be able to find my code easily. And then I've got my syntax errors. Now this enables an information bar at the top of the page that alerts me to syntax errors, but I'm not going to see it unless there is a problem. So as long as it's selected, then if I do have a problem with my syntax, the way I'm typing my code, then it will go ahead and pop up. So because of my resolution, I can't see probably all that you can, so I'm going to show more. Now here are my apply comments. So I couldn't really live without this either. So when I apply my comments, I've got several different types. The very first one is my HTML comment. So you can see right here, where I have ended the header section, that is my HTML comment. So I have an exclamation point, 2 hyphens, and it ends with 2 hyphens. So then I have my comments next that's for CSS or JavaScript. Let me go back over to my CSS here. And that's going to allow me to make several lines if I need to. So you notice here there's 3 lines of comments. And that's easy enough to do with the beginning and ending of those comments. So let's go back over to our regular code. And we'll go back over here. And I also have 2 forward slashes. Now that works great with ActionScript where it's just 1 line of code, and JavaScript as well. My last type of comment down here is for Visual Basic code. And if I am working with ASP, .NET, PHP, Cold Fusion files, then I'm going to be able to apply a server comment, and that would be available if we had that as an option. At the moment, we don't. So if I have a comment, I can get rid of a comment. So if I didn't want this, for instance, I could come back here and then delete or remove that comment. I want to keep it, so I'm going to go back and apply that comment again. It makes it really easy to go back and forth and apply comments and get rid of comments. Back in the old days, Dreamweaver 2 and Dreamweaver 3, I worked late a lot, so I used comments to leave myself notes in the code for the next day so I'd remember where to stop. My next button over is wrapping my tag. So it's just going to wrap selected code with the selected tag from the quick tag editor. So for instance, if I had something that needed to be superscripted here, for instance, so if I highlight that and I choose that particular little button, then it wraps my tag with whatever I type in there. So if I needed that to be superscripted, then I can wrap the tag with that. And I'll just delete that out of there. Don't need that to be superscripted at the moment. So then I have recent snippets as well. So snippets are kind of an interesting thought, and I don't have any available here at the moment. So I'm going to click on that to get my snippets panel. So we take a look at this. So I've got some snippets for comments and some footer information, some brief text there, some form elements, a close button, text field auto clear, really handy because anywhere else in Dreamweaver that's harder to do. And I've got some drop down menus, so numbers and years and things like that that I absolutely need on a regular basis I can have as a snippet. Anything that I create that I want to keep as a snippet, I can highlight and then drag into this panel, give it a name, and be able to access that snippet again. They're very handy. So I'm going to come back over here. And now we've got our move or convert CSS. So if I had an inline style, so for instance, I've got this little p tag right here. So if I said style, and then I gave it maybe a background, I gave it a color, and maybe I just gave it a color of red here, then that is an inline style. So that is going to take precedence over the rest of my page. If I click on my design view and look at that particular paragraph, now that paragraph is red, and that was our color that we chose. So if I go back over to my code and I take a look at that style, and I come back over here and I can say convert that inline style to a rule. And is it going to be in that particular style sheet? I'm going to convert that to a new selector. What is that going to be? And then I can click OK. One thing I probably don't want to do with that is put it inside of this particular document inside of my head tags. And we talked about our order of things before and what we really would prefer, best practices. Just because you can, do you really need to add that, to the head? Or does it really need to be on the page itself and have that be part of the cascade? So I'm going to cancel out of that and delete my crazy inline style there. And we'll go back over here and take a look at what else we can do. So I can indent my code and I can outdent my code here. And my favorite, which is especially after I've been writing code for a long time, nothing is probably in order. I have too many things that aren't indented properly. So this takes what we put into our preferences and it makes it look exactly like we were meaning to. So for instance, that is indented because it's inside of my div. And if I take a couple of those out and I come back over here and tell it to apply source formatting, then when I scroll back down, it's indented properly again. So next we'll actually look at writing some HTML ourselves, now that we know how to work within the code.